World War Z by Max Brooks. Released in 2006, this is a zombie apocalyptic horror novel. This book is a collection of individual accounts narrated by an agent of the United Nations following a global zombie plague that decimates the entire world. This book is a sort of follow-up to Max Brooks's fictitious survival manual, The Zombie Survival Guide, but with a more serious tone. And also, you don't need to read that other book to be able to appreciate this book. There was also a movie created about 10 years ago that's loosely based off of this book with the same title, World War Z, but other than the fact that the movie has zombies in it, there's hardly any other similarities between the two of them. So, if you've seen the movie and you think you know what the story is about, trust me, you don't even know the half of it. In this video, I'm going to give a brief overview of the story, then I'll give my review from a non-spoiler perspective, then my review from a spoiler perspective. The first section of this book, Warnings, tells of the origins of this virus, with it originating in China and then later spreading to other countries due to multiple factors, but mainly immigration, human trafficking, and organ trade. It isn't until the virus spreads to Africa when the first major public outbreak occurs, which leads to the virus initially being called African rabies. Later on, a widely marketed placebo vaccine named Phalanx creates a false sense of security. This period later becomes known as the Great Denial, but then the following spring a journalist reveals the uselessness of this drug, which then sparks a crisis called the Great Panic, in which order collapses across the world, with rioting, breakdown of essential services, and indiscriminate killing of citizens happens, in fact, killing more people than zombies themselves. Countries are absolutely decimated by this outbreak, governments fall, military tactics become useless against the vast horde of the growing zombie population. It isn't until 4 years pass when the United States declares its intention to go on the offensive against the undead, which inspires other countries to follow suit. New tactics are invented to more effectively combat the zombies, as every single last one of them has to be destroyed to end the pandemic. The United States is liberated 3 years later, and global victory is declared after another 2 years upon the liberation of China. 10 years later, the world is still heavily damaged, but is slowly on the road to recovery. Millions of zombies remain active, mainly on the ocean floor, mountainous regions, and in the Arctic areas. The United Nations works to establish a large force to eliminate the rest of them. The overall quality of human life has diminished significantly, including shorter life expectancies, limited access to running water and electricity, and the resurgence of diseases like the Spanish flu. Many species, especially whales, have actually gone extinct in this time period, but nevertheless, the majority of those who have survived have hope for the future, knowing that humanity has faced the brink of extinction and won. So right off the top, I will say that this book is pretty different from what I normally read. I used to be really into zombie movies and video games back in the day, but kind of fell out of that in the past 10 or so years. And I really haven't read any other zombie books other than the Zombie Survival Guide, so going into this book, I wasn't sure if it would keep my attention or if I would even like it. Well, after finishing it, I can absolutely say that this book kept my attention the entire way through, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. What's really great about this book is that it really does focus on the entire world and how different countries deal with the zombie apocalypse. It's not just one country or even a small handful of countries. You can really tell from reading this book that the author put in a ton of research into the different countries, their governments, and the many different military tactics that they use. You read about conflicts between Israel and Palestine, Russia and Ukraine, Iran and Pakistan, and more that are based on reality. Even though the book is very obviously fiction, it reads like a realistic history retelling of events that are all based on reality, just with zombies in it. It's really quite fascinating. This is also a very human story because each chapter of this book focuses on a person telling his or her own life and the things that they went through as they lived through the zombie apocalypse. You will see some people that are completely broken, have severe PTSD and depression, and then other people that feel guilty or just lost in life. You really do get a sense of despair from these characters and having seen what they go through. Since this book is written as a sort of retelling of historical events, there isn't really any character development or characters you'll get attached to. But I didn't really see this as a negative since that is just the way the story is being told. It is just worth keeping in mind though if you are expecting some great characters that you can get attached to. I really do like how in the final section of this book, Goodbyes, you get closure for each of the characters. You get their final thoughts about the life they've lived and what they see the future being for themselves. Since this book is about zombies, it probably won't come as a surprise to you to hear that this book is pretty violent and pretty gory. I know this book is also considered horror, which I guess sure it is, but I don't think it was really scary. So if you're fine reading about violence and gore but don't really like scary books, rest assured that this book won't really scare you. There might be a couple of suspenseful parts, but nothing all too scary. And I think the reason for this is that you know the characters you're reading about are not going to die. Otherwise, how would they be alive to tell their story? This does take away some of the suspense, but there are still plenty of other third-party characters that you read about that you will not know what is going to happen to them until it does. And even though this book wasn't scary, I actually had multiple dreams about this book while I was sleeping. And this almost never happens to me when I'm reading a book, so clearly this story got into my head. The zombies in this book are more like The Walking Dead, not really like 28 Days Later. So, in other words, the zombies in this book can only walk or stumble along. There's no running zombies in this book. And again, this is probably why I didn't think this book was scary, or why the dreams I had about it weren't scary either. If you can just walk away from a zombie, yeah, it's not really scary in my opinion. Now, obviously, if there's hundreds, thousands, or millions of zombies, like there are in this book, yeah, walking away is probably not going to work out for you that well. Reading through this book, you really can tell how the author was trying to criticize government ineptitude, corporate corruption, and honestly, human short sightedness. Government ineptitude is best described in this book early on in the zombie apocalypse when the United States is overconfident and distracted by an upcoming election and responds only by deploying small special operation teams to temporarily contain isolated outbreaks. Later on, when the US military finally stages a high-profile battle, their conventional warfare tactics prove insufficient against the overwhelming horde of zombies, which leads to the military being decimated on live television. Maybe they shouldn't have waited so long to respond. But that is exactly the way governments operate. A lot of times they are reactionary, not proactive. This catastrophe for the US then causes the president to suffer a nervous breakdown, resulting in the vice president and his cabinet to forcibly remove him from office. Then, the government gives up and evacuates the East Coast and establishes a new capital in Hawaii. In addition to the US failing miserably, you also have Russia decimating its own military to end rampant mutinies, Ukraine uses poisonous gas on refugees and its own citizens in an attempt to weed out the infected, and Iran and Pakistan destroy each other in a brief nuclear exchange over a refugee crisis. Corporate greed is best described in this book with the drug Phalanx. Phalanx was the zombie vaccine. It was created by this corrupt pharmaceutical developer, Breckinridge Scott. Scott jumped on the idea of a vaccine as soon as reports of African rabies outbreaks came out of Africa. In a few months, his company had developed a credible vaccine for marketing, and he quickly made a fortune. However, it all turned out to be a hoax drawn up to make money. Although it was a real vaccine for actual rabies, it was nothing more than a placebo against the zombie virus. In fact, it had never even been tested against the zombie virus at all. And this was justified as technically it was never marketed as an anti-zombie virus vaccine. It was openly described as a vaccine against rabies, which it did work against. The problem was that people wanted an anti-zombie vaccine at the same time that they refused to believe that zombies existed, which leads into how the author shows how much of the world population is short-sighted. It isn't until the world is burning around them when a lot of the population starts to take the zombie apocalypse seriously, but unfortunately at this point it is too late for the vast majority of the people, and this obviously causes far more people to die than have to. Another thing about this book is that it is incredibly dark at points. I know I already talked a little bit about that in the non-spoiler section, but just to give you some more details on what I mean by this, there is a part in this story that describes a little girl living with her family in a church. When zombies attack, the little girl's mother grabs her and is going to kill her because the mother's thinking that that's the humane thing to do. But before the mother can kill her daughter, a zombie grabs her and kills her. The little girl is then able to escape with her life. So, as the reader, you're left thinking, wow, that mother's terrible. But then you also need to think about the mother's point of view. Letting her daughter be eaten alive by zombies is probably way worse than a quick death. So the thing about this book is that it is very dense. It's not exactly a long book though. You are going to learn about a lot of different characters very quickly, and it goes through big events without much room to breathe. Normally, I don't really like that with books, but I think it lends itself to this story very well. Everything about this novel is so realistic, from the way the government responds, to how individual people respond, to how the military responds, and that is the best thing I can say about this book. It is incredibly realistic fictional story. And so all of that's pretty good, right? Well, with that said, if you are not a fan of zombie stories, I don't think this book is really going to change your mind. If you do enjoy zombie stories, though, or at the very least, they kind of interest you, then I think you'll absolutely love this book. I thought this book was great, and now that I've read it, I kind of want to check out some other zombie books. So if you have any recommendations for me, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.